The moment you disappear, he doesn't lose you, he loses control. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence. And silence doesn't end stories, it rewrites them. Today, I'm going to walk you through what happens in his mind day by day when you choose yourself and step out of his world. Control is most comfortable when it's invisible. When someone believes they have access to you, your time, your attention, your reactions. They don't label it as control. They call it connection. They call it familiarity. They call it that's just how things are. And for a long time that illusion works, because as long as you respond, explain, react, or stay available, the balance of power never shifts. It stays predictable. Silence is the first thing that shatters that predictability. When you disappear without warning, the first thing that breaks in his mind is not attachment. It's certainty, certainty that he can reach you, certainty that you'll answer, certainty that no matter what happens, you'll still be there in some form. Silence removes the safety net he didn't even realize he was standing on. And when certainty is gone, control slips. He can't guide the narrative anymore. He can't test limits. He can't provoke a reaction just to reassure himself he still matters. Silence takes away the levers he used, consciously or unconsciously, to feel powerful. At first, he may mask it with confidence. He might tell himself, she'll come back, or this is just a phase. That's not strength, that's denial, because real confidence doesn't need reassurance, and real power doesn't panic in quiet. But silence forces him to sit alone with unanswered questions. And unanswered questions make people restless. The absence of your response removes his ability to predict your behavior. And unpredictability is deeply unsettling to anyone who thrives on control. As the days pass, he begins to notice how much of the dynamic depended on you reacting. Your explanations softened his mistakes. Your forgiveness reset the clock. Your presence made things feel stable, even when they weren't healthy. Silence exposes the truth. The structure only stood because you kept holding it up. Without you participating, the imbalance becomes obvious. Control only works when both sides play their roles, and silence is the moment you stop playing. What truly disturbs him is not just that you're gone. It's that he can't reach into your world anymore. No updates, no emotional cues, no proof that he still occupies space in your mind. Silence removes access, and access is the currency of control. When access is revoked, it feels like a door locked without explanation. Not knowing what you're thinking, feeling, or doing forces him into a position he's not used to, waiting. And waiting strips power faster than confrontation ever could. Silence also flips the emotional direction of effort. Before, you were the one trying to fix, explain, understand, or hold things together. Now, if he feels unsettled, the work is on him, and that imbalance is uncomfortable. Control thrives when effort flows one way. Silence forces effort inward, where excuses don't work and distractions don't last. The mind circles the same unanswered questions again and again, because there's no external response to interrupt them. Over time, silence becomes more than absence. It becomes a mirror that reflects his behavior without commentary, without arguments to deflect blame, without emotions to manipulate, and what he sees isn't always flattering. Control depends on noise, conversations, reactions, negotiations, emotional exchanges. Silence removes the noise and leaves only truth, not closure, not reconciliation. Just truth, sitting quietly, demanding to be acknowledged. The ego is not designed to accept loss quickly. Its first instinct is protection, not truth. So when you disappear, his ego doesn't immediately turn inward. It pushes outward. It tells him he's fine. It tells him you're overreacting. It tells him this silence is temporary, insignificant, beneath his concern. Ego speaks in absolutes because uncertainty threatens its survival. As long as he believes he's unaffected, he doesn't have to confront the possibility that your absence means something deeper. In the early stages, the ego creates distance from responsibility. It reframes the situation to preserve pride. He may convince himself that you needed space, that you were too emotional, too sensitive, too demanding. This isn't clarity, it's defense. The ego would rather rewrite history than admit that someone chose to walk away, because being left challenges the identity he's built about himself, capable, desirable, in control. Accepting your disappearance as intentional would mean accepting that he wasn't enough in some way, and the ego resists that truth fiercely. During this phase, reflection feels dangerous. Reflection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like weakness to an unchecked ego. So instead of asking hard questions, he avoids them. He distracts himself. He stays busy. He seeks validation elsewhere. Anything to drown out the quiet reminder that someone once prioritized him, and now doesn't. Ego prefers noise over honesty, because honesty demands change, and change implies fault. But the ego can only hold its ground for so long. Silence has patience. Days pass, and the confidence he projected starts to feel rehearsed. The story he told himself doesn't fully explain why your absence still lingers in his thoughts. If it truly didn't matter, he wouldn't be replaying conversations. He wouldn't be wondering if you'll reach out. He wouldn't feel that subtle irritation when your name crosses his mind. These cracks don't shatter the ego immediately, but they weaken its foundation. As resistance fades, reflection begins quietly, almost reluctantly. It doesn't announce itself. It slips in during moments of stillness, late at night, in pauses between tasks, in the silence he once avoided. The ego no longer shouts. It listens, and what it hears isn't comforting. He starts remembering moments he dismissed, words he minimized, boundaries he ignored, not all at once and not with full accountability, but enough to make him uncomfortable. This is where inner conflict emerges. Part of him still wants to defend himself, to justify his actions, to blame timing or circumstances. Another part begins to acknowledge patterns. Reflection doesn't accuse, it reveals, and that's why it's so unsettling. He starts to see that your disappearance wasn't sudden. It was the final step in a long process he didn't take seriously. The ego feels exposed because reflection strips away the illusion that things were fine. What makes this stage especially difficult is that reflection happens without your input. There's no argument to win, no explanation to counter, no emotional reaction to redirect blame. He's left alone with his thoughts, and alone is where ego loses its power. Without an external opponent, the mind turns inward, and the defenses that once worked in conversation don't work in solitude. Eventually, the ego faces a choice: double down or soften. Some people harden, convincing themselves they never cared. Others begin to understand, but regardless of the outcome, the process itself is unavoidable. Silence forces the ego into a space where reflection becomes inevitable, not immediate, not comfortable, but unavoidable. When silence stretches long enough, the mind can no longer lean on pride or distraction. This is where self-questioning begins, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, persistent kind that slips in when defenses are tired. At this stage, your absence stops feeling like a temporary pause and starts feeling like a decision, and that realization changes the internal dialogue. He no longer asks when you'll return. He begins to wonder why you left. Self-questioning doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, a memory here, a sentence there. A moment he dismissed suddenly replays with new weight. He starts noticing patterns he once ignored. The times you went quiet before disappearing, the patience you showed that went unacknowledged, the emotional labor you carried without complaint. Absence sharpens memory. It removes the comfort of your presence and leaves only reflection, unfiltered and uncorrected. What unsettles him most is the shift in perspective. When you were present, he could assume you understood, assume you'd adapt, assume things didn't need urgent attention. Your absence removes that assumption. Now, every unanswered question circles back to him. Did I listen enough? Did I take her for granted? Did I mistake availability for permanence? These questions aren't asked out loud. They're asked in moments of stillness, when there's no one else to absorb the discomfort. This stage is uncomfortable because self-questioning attacks identity, not just behavior. He isn't only wondering what went wrong, he's wondering what that says about him. Being left behind forces a reevaluation of self-image. The version of himself that felt secure, respected, and unchallenged starts to feel incomplete. And that's deeply unsettling, because self-image is something people protect fiercely, even when it's built on shaky ground. He may try to push these thoughts away. He may tell himself he's overthinking, but the mind doesn't let go that easily. Once self-questioning begins, it doesn't ask permission to stay. Every quiet moment becomes an opportunity for introspection. And unlike conversations, introspection has no pause button. There's no reassurance coming from you, no confirmation, no emotional feedback, just him and the echo of his own thoughts. As self-questioning deepens, he may start comparing who he was then to who he is now, comparing how he treated you to how he treats others, comparing the effort he expected from you to the effort he was willing to give. These comparisons aren't fair, and they aren't kind, but they are honest. Absence creates honesty because it removes the need to perform. There's no audience anymore, just awareness. This phase is where accountability begins to form, even if it's incomplete. He may not fully accept responsibility, but he can no longer pretend nothing happened. The silence forces him to confront the idea that your departure was not random. It was a response to something he did, failed to do, or refused to see. And that realization lingers because it challenges the comfort of ignorance. Self-questioning is powerful because it shifts the narrative. Before, the story was about circumstances, misunderstandings, or timing. Now, the story turns inward. It becomes personal, and once something becomes personal, it's harder to escape. Absence doesn't just remove you from his life. It places him face with himself, whether he's ready or not. When answers are missing, the mind doesn't stay empty. It creates. Silence leaves space, and the human mind is uncomfortable with open space. So it fills it with assumptions, scenarios, and imagined outcomes. At this stage, your absence becomes more than a question. It becomes a canvas, and fear is often the first thing the mind paints on it. Not because fear is accurate, but because fear is loud, and silence gives it room to speak. Without your voice to clarify, every possibility feels plausible. He starts wondering what you're doing, who you're with, and how easily you moved on. The mind jumps to extremes not out of logic, but out of insecurity. Silence removes context, and without context, imagination takes over. What once felt manageable now feels out of reach. The lack of information turns neutral moments into threats, and uncertainty becomes a breeding ground for anxiety. What intensifies this fear is the loss of narrative control. When communication existed, he could shape the story, ask questions, explain himself, influence outcomes. Now, he has no role in the unfolding of your life. He doesn't know your thoughts, your emotions, or your direction. That lack of access is destabilizing. It forces him to accept that life is continuing without his input, and that realization triggers a deep, quiet fear of irrelevance. As fear grows, it often disguises itself as curiosity. He may tell himself he's just wondering, just checking, just thinking. But underneath that curiosity is the unsettling thought that he no longer matters the way he once did. The mind resists that idea, so it searches for evidence, memories, imagined interactions, hypothetical encounters. None of it brings peace, because imagination, unlike reality, offers no closure, it only loops. This is also the stage where comparison becomes toxic. He may imagine you happier, stronger, more fulfilled without him. Or worse, he may imagine you unaffected. Both possibilities threaten the ego. Fear doesn't need proof, it feeds on uncertainty. And silence provides endless uncertainty. Each day without contact reinforces the idea that something has changed permanently, even if he doesn't fully accept it yet. Fear is powerful because it isolates. It turns inward and magnifies thoughts until they feel overwhelming. Without communication, there's no external grounding, no reassurance, no correction. The mind becomes its own echo chamber, amplifying the most uncomfortable possibilities. And the more he tries to distract himself, the louder the fear becomes when the distraction ends. Silence waits patiently for the moment he's alone again. This stage is mentally exhausting, not because of what's happening, but because of what might be happening. The unknown demands constant attention. He may replay past conversations, searching for hidden meanings. He may analyze your last words, your last actions, your last silence. Fear convinces him that he missed something important, that the ending was decided long before he noticed. And that thought is unsettling because it suggests loss of awareness, not just loss of connection. The mind filling gaps with fear is not about love, it's about uncertainty. It's about losing access to information that once felt guaranteed. Silence turns imagination into a force, and imagination doesn't choose comfort. It chooses intensity, and in the absence of answers, fear becomes the loudest voice in the room, reminding him that what he doesn't know now may matter more than what he once did. Regret doesn't arrive as sadness at first. It arrives as realization, the slow, uncomfortable awareness that something valuable was misjudged while it was still within reach. At this stage, he begins to understand that your absence isn't just about distance, it's about consequence. The silence forces him to revisit moments he once minimized, moments where he assumed you would stay regardless of effort, attention, or care. Underestimation is subtle, and that's what makes its aftermath so heavy. He may start recognizing how easily he dismissed your concerns, how often he believed things could be addressed later, how he assumed your patience had no limit simply because it hadn't run out yet. Underestimation isn't always intentional cruelty. It's often comfort taken too far. It's believing someone's strength means they don't need protection, reassurance, or consistency, and when that belief collapses, regret begins to take shape. This regret is different from missing someone. Missing is emotional, regret is cognitive. It's the realization that choices mattered more than he thought they did, That silence wasn't sudden, it was earned. He starts seeing how your emotional withdrawal likely began long before your physical disappearance. The signs were there, but they were easy to ignore because ignoring them required no immediate action. Regret grows when he understands that what he overlooked wasn't small, it was foundational. What deepens the regret is the recognition of imbalance. He may begin to see how much effort you invested compared to how much he returned. How you adjusted, adapted, and compromised while he remained comfortable. Underestimation thrives in imbalance. When one person gives more, the other often assumes that level of giving is automatic, renewable, endless. Silence proves that it wasn't, and that realization stings because it reframes the entire dynamic. He may also regret the timing, not because he didn't care, but because he waited too long to show it. Regret often sounds like "I would have done better if I knew," but knowing was never the issue. The issue was believing there would always be time. Silence removes the illusion of unlimited chances. It introduces finality, even if nothing has been explicitly said. And finality forces the mind to acknowledge what can no longer be changed. At this stage, he may replay moments where a different response could have altered the outcome, a conversation he avoided, an apology he delayed, an effort he postponed. These reflections are sharp because they carry awareness without relief. There's no opportunity to correct them now. Silence offers no feedback loop, no chance to test whether growth would be noticed. Regret deepens when action is no longer possible. What makes underestimation so painful is that it's often recognized only after loss. He may begin to understand that your value wasn't just emotional. It was stabilizing. Your presence brought consistency, understanding, and grounding that he didn't fully appreciate until it was gone. And now, without you, the absence highlights what was once quietly holding things together. Regret forms not because he lost you, but because he failed to recognize what he had while he had it. This is where the weight of silence becomes undeniable, not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. Underestimation turns into self-awareness, and self-awareness brings discomfort. Because once he sees it, he can't unsee it. Silence doesn't accuse him. It allows him to accuse himself. And that internal reckoning lingers unresolved, growing heavier with each day that passes without a chance to undo what was once taken for granted. At this stage, the silence has changed its meaning. It no longer feels like absence, it feels like distance. Not emotional distance, but mental distance. He begins to sense that while he was stuck replaying the past, you were moving forward. And that realization carries a different kind of weight. Growth doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek validation, but it leaves traces, and those traces are impossible to ignore when silence has lasted long enough. He notices it first in what he doesn't receive: no late night messages, no emotional check-ins, no subtle signals asking for reassurance. The absence of those patterns tells him something important has shifted. You are no longer orbiting his world, and that's unsettling because control once depended on your emotional availability. Growth shows itself in independence, and independence removes leverage. The more he senses that you no longer need him, the more the silence feels intentional. This realization challenges him in ways words never could. Arguments could be dismissed, emotions could be minimized, but growth cannot be argued with. It stands quietly, confidently, without explanation. He may hear about you indirectly, through changes, through distance, through the way your name is no longer followed by urgency. Even without proof, he feels it. Your life is expanding beyond the space he once occupied. What makes this stage powerful is the contrast. He compares where he is emotionally to where you seem to be. While he has been reflecting, questioning, and replaying, you appear to have reached clarity. Not because you forgot, but because you processed. Growth doesn't erase the past, it integrates it, and that's what unsettles him most. You didn't disappear to escape. You disappeared to evolve. This is where admiration and discomfort intersect. He may respect your strength while simultaneously feeling diminished by it. Growth highlights stagnation. Your silence becomes evidence that healing happened without his involvement, and that realization strips away any remaining illusion of centrality. He is no longer the axis around which your emotional world turns. That shift is profound because it redefines his role from essential to optional. Growth also reframes the silence retroactively. He begins to understand that it wasn't punishment, manipulation, or avoidance. It was self-preservation. You didn't leave to be noticed. You left to protect your peace. And peace is something that doesn't require explanation. That understanding lands quietly but firmly. It doesn't bring closure. It brings respect, mixed with regret and a sense of finality. At this point, the silence no longer feels temporary. It feels settled. Not cold, but resolved, and that's when it becomes hardest to ignore, because growth carries a calm that doesn't invite disruption. He realizes that reaching out now would not restore the past. It would interrupt the future you've already stepped into. And that awareness changes the tone of his thoughts from longing to acceptance. Growth, once recognized, cannot be unseen. It shifts the power dynamic permanently. Silence was the doorway, growth was what lay beyond it. And even without words, even without explanation, he understands one undeniable truth. You didn't just leave, you outgrew the version of the world that required him to stay. Silence was never about disappearing. It was about reclaiming space where your voice was once ignored. What he felt wasn't abandonment. It was the echo of his own inaction. What unsettled him wasn't loss. It was realization. Because when someone grows quietly, without explanation, without announcement, it forces the truth to surface on its own. And by the time understanding arrives, the silence has already done its work.